I agree with that. I think that's a big part of it, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, there is an audience for that. But one general point, which is why I always use the phrase cultural speciesism, is the fact that we have to understand the culture in which people are born, and it's the culture in which people are brought up in. So this is to do with primary socialization, and that is an incredibly powerful thing in our lives. It lays down some of our basic understandings of what we are, what we're all about, who we are in the world, our attitudes and our values and all that. It all starts there, and we usually get it from the family, but not always. But that is part of the culture. The family gets it from the general culture, and the general culture that we are born into and raised in is very deeply speciesist. We, in this conversation, the rapport that Linda's talking about, we've got to be the ones who understand this situation, that those people are just a reflection of their culture, and we're trying to challenge it, as Jeremy said, or confront it, or what was the phrase that was used, disrupt it, right? So that is true. We have to do that, but you have to do it with an appreciation of the depth of the culture which the other person is kind of in. They're a cultural product. They're not just appear on the street out of nowhere.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You've got to understand how their minds operate, otherwise you're not going to be able to do. You're not going to be like if you went to repair a car, you've got to understand how a car works, haven't you? Otherwise,
yeah, but you see, going back to that point about meeting people where they are, well, where they are sociologically is within the culture of speciesism. So you're talking to a speciesist, but you're also talking to an animal welfarist. You're also talking to an animal lover, mostly. You're also talking to somebody who will swear that they hate animal cruelty and that they are totally opposed to animal abuse. So that's them. So that's a little conundrum. And you might say, well, there's some contradictory elements there. Well, that's for us to tease out. We can't tease that out by calling them names.
No.
You've got to go, okay, well, let's break this down. I mean, you've got to kind of, deconstruct it almost. But that's our job as the educator part of it.
Where people have this, what they would consider love for, dogs and cats, animals that they have in their homes. I think that can be used to promote veganism, but in the sense that they've become to know those animals as individuals. They know those animals as individuals, and if we can get them to think of other animals as individuals as well, that
but also a talking point there, Ronnie, is to point out that farmed other animals are never seen as individuals.
They're never seen as individuals, but they're just as individual.
So that gets us to think, well, why is that then?
But I think it's the fact that because they're familiar with those animals, they see the individuality of those animals, right? Because they just see animals like pigs or chickens or whatever animals they eat just as this mass of animals together type of thing.
Yeah, actually, this is interesting in relation to what you've just said, because Joan Donnea was the only person who kind of argued for insect rights. It's kind of like most theorists in the movement have kind of steered away from that for kind of obvious reasons, really. But she didn't. But she also said you've got to think of every fly and every moth, etc., as an individual who will, if killed, that person will never come back into the world again.
I think that's true, and I think it's important to give them the benefit of the doubt, isn't it? Because insects are so small, and it's so difficult to avoid harming them because they're kind of so small, isn't it? That's the problem. I think we should do our best to do that, to avoid harming them. But I think that's kind of one of the difficulties, isn't it, with insects is their size.
I bet the people who study them probably regard them as individuals much more than in general, right? Because they studied them, they see different personalities, and it's not a question of them just being stimulus response, all that kind of behaviorism type stuff. That they're almost like robots who've been programmed. They probably wouldn't see them that way, and so therefore they're much more likely, because of their ethology about them, to see them as individuals than the general public, I would think.
It's to do with any animals that we kind of become kind of, familiar with. Really, I mean, I've got a friend who used to run a sanctuary for hens, and some years ago, I spent a day helping her at the sanctuary, and she had all these hens that all looked exactly the same. I think they were like, nearly all of them were kind of Rhode Island Reds, I think, that had been kind of rescued from battery farms and places like that. And they all looked the same to me. But if I pointed to one, she could tell me everything about that hen. The health problems that hen had, when the hen came to the sanctuary, everything. She knew them all as individuals. But anyone just kind of looking at them would just think, oh, that's just like a flock of hens. And I think if any animals that we kind of become familiar with, we start to understand them all as individuals.